Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me once again. This topic may seem as though it's been beaten into the ground, although I know that it needs to be talked about, and that is why I am talking about it. In the last couple videos, I addressed the fact that with the Mueller report coming out, there is going to be something new that is thrust into the mainstream media that is going to be used to distract us. However, I think what's going on is far worse than that. And the Mueller report was nothing more than a distraction leading up to this event that we're witnessing right now in front of our eyes. And I want everybody to go back and check out my previous videos if you have not, because I have a curse of being able to foresee what is going to happen, and I predicted this 100% down to the countries involved. And there is no coincidence that China and Russia are there, and not only that, they have been in Mexico as well as Venezuela for the last couple decades. It just hasn't been talked about. There has been Chinese military drills that Mexico has taken part in and facilitated less than 20 miles from the border of the United States of America within the last decade. Now, there is no coincidence that Donald Trump ran on border security and promised that wall. He knew that this entire thing was being engineered as far back as the 1980s and even prior to that, especially if you look at the Rex 84 plan. Now, a lot of people would like to think that Rex 84 is designed in order to put people into FEMA camps that are citizens of the United States and strip us of our constitutional rights. However, you have to look at FEMA camp as though it is a tool, just like a gun. A gun can be used to defend your entire family. So for instance, if an asteroid came down and hit, I don't even believe in asteroids, so let's just say a hurricane came and wiped out your entire fucking city, I bet you're going to be going to a camp facilitated by the government or a government fucking facility that provides shelter, and you're going to be very happy in that instance. And as long as it's not used for nefarious purposes, that tool is acceptable in today's society, in my opinion. Now, if you look at Rex 84, Donald Trump could very well utilize it to help solve the crisis that is going on right now. And what's happening is you are seeing 50,000 people a month being apprehended at the border, okay? We're talking in excess of 20,000 children that are unaccompanied or their parents can't be verified as actually being their parents. So what happens in these cases is we, according to our law, are required to facilitate these so-called families until we can verify whether or not they're supposed to be together. Now, we keep the children separate from the so-called parents. However, we're not allowed to deport the parents without processing the children. So in essence, if you come over the border with a child, you're more or less caught and released. And what ends up happening is these parents in these countries that have been dragged into the ground by the UN agendas over the last 20 and 30 years are so desperate that they're actually giving their kids to these coyotes to smuggle up into the United States. So what they're doing is they're giving their child to somebody who doesn't have one. Now what happens is the child gets into the United States, and this person is now given the tool, which is the child, in order to help them stay in the United States. So it's a win-win situation in their eyes. And what happens is that the parents come up later on, they try to sneak their way in, etc., etc., or they just send their kid to the United States for a better life, and they themselves end up staying wherever they're from because they can't facilitate a way to get themselves here. Maybe they're not healthy enough, etc., etc. Now, you have to realize that this is a systemic issue when it comes down to the culture and society of South America and Central America. What most people neglect to realize is the crime rate in Mexico is only 10% of that in Guatemala, Colombia, Venezuela, etc. And a lot of people think that the Sinaloa cartel and these cartels are so vicious. And don't get me wrong, they are. These gangs are horrible in Mexico. They fucking run entire states of that country. However, like I just said, as horrible as Mexico is when it comes to organized crime and corruption, everything that's going on in Mexico only equates to 10% of the total crime of any of these Central American and South American countries. Now, what's happening is, as soon as these people manage to get to a border, they're running up to the border with these children. And because they have children in their hands, the border agency and the military of these countries in Central America and South America are standing down because they don't want to do harm to a child. And on top of that, there's video of parents literally pulling their kids underwater through concertina wire in order to get back to Mexico after being caught by Border Patrol. So what that means is they already did that to their children once to get to the American side of the border. And then Border Patrol shows up and they go back under the concertina wire, under the water, fucking under the fence, back to Mexico. And they're doing this all with children in their arms. You can see little kids bleeding. It's absolutely insane that people are willing to do this to their kids. They're going to bring them across 150 miles of a desert with minimal water and food. God knows what's going to happen to them. And that must say a lot for how horrible their situation is at home. But we have to realize that that was all created by the UN and their humanitarian aid, which inevitably leads to lethargic people, period. The same thing happened in Africa. Instead of going out and actually making their society sustainable when it comes to growing their own food and building the infrastructure, what incentive did the Africans have to do that? Because we provided a bunch of humanitarian aid, we flooded them with food, and what that did is it gave them the means to reproduce and just create an even bigger systemic problem because they can't grow their own food. We keep providing them with food, therefore their population keeps growing up, therefore they can never provide enough food, inevitably making them dependent on us 100%, which is exactly what they want, and it's exactly what you're witnessing in Central and South America right now. It's the same process that's been played out over and over again. And I want people to go back and look at a lot of my videos that I've done pertaining to this topic, because I'm starting to think I have a curse of foreseeing what is going to happen. And the only reason I'm able to do this is because I pay attention to what's going on behind the scenes. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is China has been in Mexico conducting military operations and training within 25 to 50 miles of the United States border over the last 2 decades with the support and facilitation by the Mexican military. And on top of that, of course, Russia would have had a presence in Venezuela for as long as they have, considering their ties to socialism and their history pertaining to all of that. Now, what's very interesting is I called all of this at least 3 months ago. I said straight up that the reason Donald Trump is building this border wall is because of a military presence with China inside of Mexico. Now, don't get me wrong, the migrant crisis or illegal alien crisis invasion that we see going on right now is nothing more than a facade to facilitate the push of this narrative in the mainstream media. They need a way to be able to hype this crisis in the eyes of the average citizen and the population of the United States, and they want to make this a moral issue. They don't want people paying attention to the fact that Donald Trump has every right, according to the Constitution, to militarize the border without congressional approval. He's granted that power as the executive of this country, 100%. He doesn't need court approval, etc., etc. Not at all. The only way that he wouldn't be allowed to do so is if the Supreme Court stepped in and said no. And that's not going to happen with the way things are going right now, because it needs to be done. In my opinion, what they're trying to do is overflow our border with illegal invaders. And what happens at that point is, now a lot of people are saying, hey, Border Patrol, just do your job. Okay, well, what does one guy do when he's confronted with a group of 200 people trying to cross the border? How is he going to do his job? So what happens is, if Donald Trump doesn't militarize the border and put National Guard on the border and order it himself, instead of leaving it up to the individual states to do, we're going to see an influx of people storming the border all at once. And even if they are apprehended, they're being apprehended at such a rate that we don't have the facilities to house them at all. At all. Because what's happening is, like I said, you're running into 200 people per CPP personnel, right? Now, there's no way for them to be able to keep that in check, okay? But let's just say we manage to catch the 50,000 people a month they're saying that we are. Where do you house these people, especially considering each sector only has beds for 5,000 people? So what ends up happening is you're going to have to house and facilitate these people, whether it be in prisons or overflows that we have set up as far as camps that are used for FEMA crises, etc., etc. And there's actually a plan on the books right now that everybody thought was going to be used against us, the Americans, that I have a feeling is going to save the day. And that is Rex 84. So basically, back in the day, there was a plan developed by Reagan that was called Rex 84, and basically it established a network of camps in order to house masses of people, in order to house, process, and figure out what was going on in case of a national emergency. And that's exactly what we're witnessing right now. Now, a lot of people back then thought it was going to be used against the average American, you and me. However, I think this may very well be our saving grace. And like I said prior, anybody with two eyes would have been able to see that China and Russia were making moves to facilitate this kind of crisis, because they understood what was going on with the UN. What the UN has done over the last 30 or 40 years is they have set up camps starting in Guatemala, Colombia, etc., all the way down to the Brazilian border. So what they did is they started there, and every couple hundred miles or so, they build these refugee checkpoint centers that allow you to get medical aid, food, clothing, shelter for a few nights, water, a shower, basic hygiene, etc. And they'd have these stations every couple hundred miles where they'd give you money and all of this. And this was all paid and bought for by the UN, right? So what China realized is, we can use this to our advantage. And by inserting ourselves in that region, we can capitalize on it when the UN actually decides to push their agenda. See, I don't think China and the UN are in on this together. I think China's being very smart and using the UN's plan to facilitate their own gain. And you can't really blame them for doing so. It's very intelligent. Now, Russia has a vested interest in destabilizing South America. So what the United States has been doing for years and years and years to Russia is we've been posturing and maneuvering our military forces closer and closer and closer to their border, which is exactly what Russia doesn't want us doing. Now, when we do this, through putting missile defense systems near Ukraine and Poland, etc. We're the good guys, are we not? However, put yourselves in Putin's shoes for a minute and realize that the United States now has missile defense systems set up right on our border that could very easily be turned into offensive systems at the flip of a switch. And don't think for a minute that that can't happen. Not only that, you facilitate airstrikes, mobile invasions, etc., etc. There's literally boots on the ground within fucking 2.5 hours of Russia right now. You think Putin likes that? No. So if Putin has the opportunity to use the situation in Venezuela to his advantage, why would he not? So by going into Venezuela and talking to that dictator and telling him straight up, I'm going to help you out, I'm going to supply you with aid, I'll prop you up, etc. However, you have to let my military forces come in and we're going to do things my way. And if you don't do this, you're not going to get our aid. And of course, he's going to say, okay, come on in. I can use your help. I'm not going to argue. The rest of the world is against me right now. I can't even keep my own lights on. So what you're seeing right now is Russia trying to implement the same exact plan that the United States has. But instead of Russia using their own troops and their own men to destabilize our borders, right? They're using the immigrant crisis that was developed by the UN and facilitated by our tax dollars that we paid into this system. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy. And by money that we've put into it, I mean through the fucking United Nations, etc., etc. We've dumped money into these programs, period, the end, because we belong to this organization. So basically, we've used our own tax dollars to facilitate the destruction of our own border. And I have a complaint when it comes to Donald Trump right now because I think he's trying to use this crisis for his own gain as well. And that is the common theme we are constantly seeing, is nobody can ever let a good crisis go to waste. Instead of fixing the fucking problem, they try to sustain it, draw it out, and utilize it in order to control the narrative and help themselves up to get higher power within this system that we play in, instead of actually fixing the problem and doing their fucking job. Because if Donald Trump wanted to, like I said, he could declare with an executive order tomorrow that we are militarizing our border. We are closing it to all civilian traffic back and forth. We're not even going to have it open for the first couple of days for commercial traffic till we implement our new systems. And after we figure out what's going on, we'll reopen it for commercial traffic only, but it's going to be militarized, period, the end. And once we settle this crisis and make Mexico actually deal with the migrant crisis that they themselves are allowing to happen by letting their borders be breached, we'll be okay. But as long as we have China and Russia pulling puppet strings behind the scenes, how can we ever expect things to improve? What's happening is we are being drawn into a no-win situation where no matter what happens, if Donald Trump doesn't act immediately, he's going to be backed into a corner where he has no choice but to make a bad decision. And that is my honest take on what is going on right now. And I called this 3 months ago. Go back and watch my previous videos if you haven't seen them. I don't remember the title of it, but I'm pretty sure if you go and you look, it won't be that hard to find. Now, I'm going to be giving out more videos pertaining to the esoteric side of things. As far as our hidden history, I'm going to do another video right after this one for you guys. But when it comes to these topics from this point forward, I've been having a lot of trouble finding traction as far as which direction to go. So if you want to hear about those topics more often, I am going to tell you right now, I'm going to base every bit of research I do on subscriber-suggested topics, period. I don't want to have to sit there and cruise the internet and pick and choose what I'm going to study It's like going through Netflix and trying to find a movie to watch. I can't do it. I'm always just skimming the surface, hopping from subject to subject, so I'd rather concentrate on what you guys want to hear and just make myself do that research, because if you find it interesting, chances are I'm going to. We're going to leave things there. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, leave them in the comments. A thumbs up and subscription would be great. You can share, embed, do whatever you want with my videos. They're there for you to be used. I appreciate your support. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.